The Taliban right now in Afghanistan is causing a massive amount of devastation, and we see what frustration people are having with Joe Biden right now as well. And I want to kind of navigate what's going on, as well as, most importantly, what Jesus has to say about this whole thing, how it applies to end times prophecies, and how you and I as Christians can be a part of it and do something about it. And no, I'm not asking for donations or anything like that either. What's going on, guys? My name is Cody Wynn, and I've been following this thing as well as a lot of things that have happened specifically in the Middle East over the past few years, and I've been very heavily invested spiritually into this place because I'm very, very passionate about the Middle East. Obviously, I'm passionate about Jerusalem and passionate about the Jewish people, and I'm passionate about Jesus himself and what he's called us to do. And I believe that most of these kinds of conversations are more political and news related and not as much Christ related. So I want to kind of take the Jesus stance on this thing and not so much on the political stance of this thing. Now, obviously, again, I understand that it has political implications. No questions about that at all. But I want to talk about Jesus' heart and how you and me can actually do something that's going to make an impact in this thing for eternity. So with that being said, let's get into it. So to fill you up shortly, if you are not familiar with what's been going on lately, Joe Biden had removed the United States troops and people in the embassy out of Afghanistan. And when this happened, the Taliban army, which is Islamic extremists, they came in their military, and they came in and took over the country in practically a 24-hour span, which is how, from eyewitnesses of Christians in the underground church in Afghanistan have explained it, at least. And they said that overnight, practically, that the army there has completely infiltrated the country and has taken it by force and is going on a rampage of killing people. Now, again, that is from words of people who are part of the underground church there. Now, on the political side of this, it's important to note that Donald Trump as well was planning on removing all of these people from Afghanistan because of the amount of money that was being spent. But the reason that he had kept them there was because they had signed an agreement together, and there was a list of contingencies upon that agreement that would allow us to remove ourselves from Afghanistan. And since that was breached by the Taliban, we chose to stay there. So that was the reason for us staying. But Trump was actually also pro-leaving. They just weren't he wasn't pro-leaving in the way that it just happened. And in Donald Trump's words, it is the most humiliating thing that has happened since America's history. So that's what Donald Trump said. Again, not saying whatever, you do what you would like to. But what I want to get at more importantly here is, again, on the spiritual side of this, how us as Christians are supposed to respond to such a thing happening, as well as what this means in context of end times and Revelation. Because I don't know if you know, but this is literally part of an end times prophecy being fulfilled right in front of our eyes. We're watching it happen. And I think that when an end times prophecy like this does happen, we as the church should be really intentional about paying attention, because we always talk about end times in the church, and I fear that we oftentimes talk about it but don't talk about what we're supposed to do because of them. So I don't want to be one of those end times videos that I'm just telling you a bunch of my personal prophecies that I think God told me and then running off with. I want to tell you what Jesus says about these things. So first off, I want to kind of get in the mind, 1 Corinthians chapter 9 says that we have been given, chapter 2 says we have been given the mind of Christ. If you look at the word mind in Greek, it says the thoughts, feelings, will, and emotions. And we're supposed to have the emotions of Jesus in this moment right now. So I want to ask, what do you think Jesus' emotions are right now over what's going on? Do you think that he's happy about it? Well, I'd say probably not. He's probably upset about it, or sad, or heartbroken about it, or devastated to see what's happening to specifically the church there, but non-believers as well. But I know that heartbreak is one of those feelings that the Lord must be feeling from everything that's going on right now, because obviously as hard as not for Christians to be murdered by Islamic extremists, and for Islamic extremists to try to take over with jihad and whatever they're trying to force right now, that is not the Lord's heart. Obviously, we know that. Now, how would he respond? Like, we know that he would not feel happy about it. We know that he'd probably have a righteous anger about it. But what does that mean in context of you and I? Because again, if we're given the mind of Christ, we should be experiencing the same kinds of feelings, emotions, and desires as the Lord is feeling in these things. First off, I think that Jesus gives us that answer really clearly in Matthew 5 in the Sermon on the Mount, where he says, "Do you love those who love you? If so, what value of that is it to you? Don't even the pagans and tax collectors do that. For I tell you to love your enemy and pray for those who persecute you. Now, I find that when people quote scriptures like this, the person who's hearing the scripture immediately goes to, oh, yeah, that's right. I'm going to make sure that I am praying when I'm in my car. I'll just say a quick little prayer for him. No, I mean on your knees, devoted prayer, just like if you lost your job and you're seeking wisdom and counsel from God. This kind of seeking of the Lord, that is what prayer, I believe God is calling us to do in times like this, to love our enemies and pray for those who persecute us. It's very difficult for us to love an enemy like this who is killing our brothers and sisters in Christ. So I think it's important, though, that we obey Jesus' command in making sure that we are loving these people and praying for them and praying for their salvations, because, again, praying that Joe Biden changes his political view or stance on something is not what I see scripturally as the correct line of action there. Jesus goes in this more when he is asked about the coin and in regards to paying taxes to Caesar, and the Pharisees trying to set him up, say, should we pay taxes? And Jesus doesn't mention anything in regards to changing political views on a circumstance. He wants to change spiritual views on a circumstance. He says, give to Caesar's what is his. I don't care about that. Just do what he's told you to do. But now let's focus on something more important. I'm paraphrasing, obviously. He says, I need you to give to God's what is God's. What is God's? Your whole life. You're supposed to be a steward of what God has given you and represent your life to Christ in the way that He has called you to do so. That is what God has called you to. And it said that the crowds were filled with amazement by His answer. They weren't filled with amazement because He said pay taxes. That was a normal standard answer at the time. What they were filled with amazement for is the fact that Jesus was making a shot at the fact that these people were not living for the Lord as they had acted like they were. And I fear that a lot of the church that I see today, they're so intense and so caring about these political matters that they're kind of like that Pharisee who is saying, hey, what do you say about this political topic? Or what do you say about that political topic? And Jesus' response is, what do you care about more, the political topics or the spiritual topics? How's your heart? When's the last time you represented Jesus to somebody? Did you even preach the gospel to somebody this week? Have you even loved somebody? Have you even sacrificed, discipled somebody? Like real biblical things that we're seeing right now. Are you doing those kinds of things? Because that's what Christ has called us to do. He hasn't called us just to debate politics, considering we don't see Him or anybody else in Scriptures debating politics in our New Testament Bible. We see them debating the matters of the heart. And if you can change somebody's heart spiritually, if we can get Joe Biden to give his life to Jesus, if we can get Taliban members to give their lives to Jesus, then at that point they're going to be changing their hearts on some of these moral political topics as well. So again, I want to make sure that we're not getting off base with our view and our understandings of these things as the church. So that's the next point that I wanted to hit there. Next point I want to hit is in context of Revelation. As I said, this has a huge implication in regards to Revelation, in the book of Revelation, and some of the things that we see in regards to end times. What in regards to end times does the Taliban and whatnot have to do with this? Well, first off, one of the most exciting things to me I should mention is that Afghanistan is the second largest or second fastest growing church in the entire world today, second to Iraq. Think about that for a second. Second fastest growing church, and they just got infiltrated by the Taliban. And most people fear that this would probably hurt what is going on with the Christian movement there. And judging by what we've seen in the Church of Iraq, the Church of Iran, I said Iraq, I meant to say Church of Iran, we see actually the complete opposite. That these places that are most heavily persecuted almost always are the fastest growing churches as well, under Muslim extremist, whether it's dictatorship or just military people being in there and taking over by force. We find that these are the fastest growing churches, which I hope is something that we can rejoice in as the church. The next point, though, in regards to Revelation is we obviously know that Revelation tells us that things are going to get worse before they get better. In the end times, we know that there's going to be a mass tribulation. We see in Jesus speaking in Matthew 24 about how these nations will be rising up against each other and whatnot. And we see that Christians are going to be martyred and are going to be oppressed for their faith more than ever before in history. And in context of end times, I want to kind of just expose maybe a little bit of a contradiction that I see in the church on a weekly basis in regards to end times prophecies. I see everybody and their brother wants to know these end times prophecies and wants to know how what is going on today is applicable to those end times prophecies. But at the same time that that's happening, I see people get extremely upset when those end times prophecies exist in our country. Let me give you an example. When we see that abortion is illegalized, abortion is legalized, this is a step closer to us getting to Jesus' return. I know that because, again, we know by Scripture and Revelation that things are going to get way worse before they get better. Yet at the same time when those things happen, or maybe I'll put the abortion thing to the side for a second, free speech. Free speech is being taken away from us as Americans, and people get extremely upset by that, but we also understand that biblically that was already told to us that was going to happen for Jesus' return to happen. So my confusion is, why is the church begging for end times prophecies to come true so that Jesus can return, but getting extremely upset and fighting against those things when they actually do happen? Again, if you know that they're going to happen anyways, a lot of the fighting that I see happening against these things is kind of counterintuitive because you're trying to stop the prophecies from happening. Now, I know that people don't think about it that way, and that's not people's intentions or thought processes when they're going about these things, but their life shows by their actions that that's really what they're doing. Now, am I saying don't stand up for free speech? Obviously, I'm super pro free speech. I mean, we're talking in this video, so obviously the things I'm saying in this video, I don't want to be censored because I'm not talking in the highest light of Islamic extremists or anything like that. Again, I'm all about free speech, but my point is when I see people getting super upset about these things, it seems a bit counterintuitive to people's desire and extreme heart cry of Maranatha for Jesus to come back quickly. I invite those things to happen. I don't encourage them to happen. I don't want them to happen. I'm going to keep speaking freely about Jesus. Nothing's going to stop me from doing that. But I'm also saying I'm open and understanding that those things are going to happen, and hey, Jesus, bring the rain, because this means that you're going to be coming back quicker, and this means that there's going to be a mass revival that's going to be taking place among the people in the church. So make sure that with all of these things in context that you recognize, and it's not rejoicing in the negative things that are happening, but we're rejoicing in knowing that this is one step closer to Jesus and these end times prophecies being fulfilled. Last point I want to get at in this is how you and I have a place to respond in what's going on. You know, I'd mentioned earlier that I'm not looking for donations, and that's still true, but it is important to consider there is a church in Afghanistan right now who probably is in desperate need of your money. And this underground church is similar that I'm reminded to in wherever that is in 1 Corinthians around chapter 10 when it mentions giving money to the Church of Jerusalem. Obviously, I understand that was for a specific context, but I think that this context is extremely justifiable in regards to giving your finances to the church in need over there. But most importantly, the point that I'm trying to get at is, what are you personally supposed to do, not with your finances necessarily, but with your life in regards to that stewardship concept we mentioned earlier? Well, I think Jesus is really clear in what we're supposed to do. Jesus has given us a commission in Matthew 28 to go and make disciples of all nations. If we can't make those disciples, with our actual bodies there, then again, we can do it with our money there. But again, that's not even the point I'm getting at. The point that I'm getting at is the relevancy to what you can do today in America. Most of us are not going to be flying over to Afghanistan anytime soon to be able to make an impact in their lives face to face. But it should be a very clear reminder in our own lives that we will not have free speech one day. That we will not be able to represent Jesus without extreme repercussions. And what are you doing today? And what did you do yesterday and this past month to be able to represent Jesus well? Did you do anything? Did you do anything to represent Jesus well? Did you present the gospel to any lost person? Did you disciple anybody who's in the church who's needing to look more like Christ? Because if you have not done those things, then you're showing your expectation and desire for end times things to come true, for God's kingdom to be on earth as it is in heaven to be true. Any of those things, you're showing by your actions your desire for those things to happen. And again, I'm not here to spank you or spiritually rebuke you or anything like that. I just want to see the church live up to her full potential, because Jesus is coming back for a spotless bride one day. And if we're not a church that is magnifying His great name's sake, then we are not doing those things. It's important that when you're at the grocery store, when you're at the gym, when you're at your workplace, when you're hanging out with friends after work, these are all perfect opportunities for you to represent Christ. And there's a church currently in Afghanistan that is in tears. I just watched a video earlier today, as I said, and they are weeping and wishing that they had the same opportunities that we have today in America. We have all of the opportunity in the world, and they have none right now, and we're taking little to no advantage of it. And in the midst of extreme persecution and martyrdom for their faith, they are still still presenting the gospel more than 99% of evangelicals that I see in our churches today. So my question for you is, are you representing Jesus to the lost and dying world? Are you being Jesus and serving the least of these? Are you discipling those people who need to look more like Christ? Or have you been discipled if you haven't been made to be on meat as a Christian? Because if not, then we're not fulfilling the only reason that we're on this earth. I fear that a lot of times we're so focused, so busy, so big on doing all of these things as the church that have to do with things that are fading away. There's a parable, and I believe it's Matthew chapter 21, where Jesus talks about his wedding feast. And in this wedding feast, he's bringing and inviting all of these people. And the day of the wedding feast, he is preparing for everybody to come and sends one of his servants out to make sure that everybody's going to be there. And one makes the excuse that he's busy with his wife. One is busy with his farm, and one is busy with his business. None of these things are demonic things. None of these things in and of themselves are sinful. But when they're keeping you from fulfilling what God has called us to fulfill as the church, the Ephesians 4, building up the saints to the fullness of the stature of Christ, when we're not doing those things, yet we have time for our wives, we have time for our businesses, time for feeding and going to the grocery store in a today time context, Jesus is going to find his people wherever they can be. Highways and byways, the lame, the pitiful, poor, blind, naked, the people who are in Afghanistan who are willing to accept his name and live for him too. I fear that us as the church oftentimes get wooed away by all of the worries of this world, that we don't even consider these things that Jesus has called us to in that context. So, I appreciate you all. I love you all. Pray for these people. Pray for your enemies. Love those who persecute you. Love your enemies. Pray for those who persecute you. And make sure that today in your life, we're not just so worried about other people in their life across the world that we're not even considering what we're doing today as the church. If you would, like the video, subscribe. It just helps preach the gospel to more and more people through these videos. I appreciate you all. I'll chat with you guys in the next one.